Okay. All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Marlena Gonzalez. I'm here from the Middle Country Public Library. I'm one of the Adult Services librarians. And I see that we have a nice crew already. We have 22 people here, and I think we had a few more signed up. So we'll see if a few more people are able to join in. I just wanted to mention before I turn the program over to Sarah, in case you are aware or unaware, I should say, the Ancestry Library Edition, the subscription has been available remotely for since kind of around the beginning of the pandemic, and it is still available to access remotely until the end of June. They've extended it up to the end of June. And if you have a Middle Country Public Library card, or actually any Suffolk County Library card where the library subscribes to Ancestry Library Edition, you can access that until the end of June from home. So I am going to put the link in the chat to access that, just so you know, you can't create a tree or access anybody else's tree, and you can't access the DNA platform, but you can search and save any records you find, and it's really a great resource. So I just wanted to mention that, or I will forget. And now I'm going to turn it over to Sarah Gutmann. So thank you, everybody.
And thank you, Marlena. Please extend a big thank you to the library for setting this up. It's always a beautiful, fun treat to talk to you folks about my favorite topic, genealogy. So thank you for allowing me to do that and not bore my family for an hour. I'll talk to you guys. So tonight we're going to be focusing on our female ancestors. And I don't know about you, but I'm also kind of guilty of this too. I think a lot of times we get really excited, especially with that last name line, that paternal line, and we focus on the men. And we focus on the men a lot of times because it's easier, and there are a lot of records based off of them. But women make up 50% of the population. Hopefully I didn't just tell you something you didn't know already. And from what I'm seeing here tonight, there are a lot of women joining us. So we're important, ladies, and so are our female ancestors. So tonight, some of the things that we're going to go over are the importance of knowing your history and why that's important to understanding your female ancestors. I'm going to send you on a scavenger hunt inside your own house, inside somebody else's house. Hopefully you know that person, or because you don't want to have the police being called on you. But I'm going to tell you on some stuff to go looking for. We'll examine marriage records, because that's the number one record source for women that you can get the most bang for your buck out of. We'll look for her in different forms of print. I'll show you how to examine some lineage societies, especially the DAR, to see if she's already been traced back, and how you can kind of jump on that and get some information. We'll also, of course, talk about the men in her life, because we are who we are because of our family. In so many cases, I have two sons, I have a husband, my father, my brother. They all are important to me, and they're all important on the record collections that I'm going to be focusing on. So it's really important to know the men in her life, because that's going to help you pick up those names. But are you hearing a clicking in the background or no? I think that's my dog's nails. Hold on a sec. Can you get him upstairs? Why? Because his nails are clicking. Okay, I don't know. I'm gonna have to make an appointment with a groomer. Okay, sorry everybody. So I'm gonna teach you also to what's available out there, the different types of resources. Yeah. Yeah, the dog. Get the dog out of here. Okay. And we'll talk about the different laws that are there, how that affects women, and the record cases that they're going to be found in, and also how to use DNA to help you out to look for your female ancestors. And this program's for you. So having said that, I'm going to be asking a bunch of questions, and I was a teacher for 10 years, so I'm totally used to awkward silences. And I have a husband who, pretends to pay attention to me, so I'm super used to awkward silences. So I'll ask you to unmute yourself at different points. Kind of have like a conversation. We'll have some fun, in the next hour or so you're not just listening to me chat. So anybody want to take a guess why it's important to know your history when looking for your female ancestors or any family members? Anybody just want to take a guess? Feel free to put it in chat or unmute yourself, whatever. and I'll help you out too. If we're on the beginning questions a little hard. So if you think about it, one of the things that we're basing on in genealogy is so much about names, dates, and places. You know, we find the birth record of somebody, find a marriage record, the death record. What those dates are doing is they're putting a person in a time and a place in history. Somebody growing up on Long Island in 2020 is going to have a much different experience than somebody in Nebraska in 1920. Okay. So you really have to know what's going on at that time period, what's going on in that local area, the ethnicity of people, how they were being treated at the time. That's really important. I'm a big fan of looking at local histories. And one of the ways of doing that is reaching out and looking into Google Books, which is totally free. You just go to googlebooks.com. It's different from regular Google. And what I do is I just insert the name of the town where my ancestors were from. And they give these little like yearbook stories just about what was happening during that period and kind of get a sense of what was going on in their lives, and focusing on that. I have these pictures here. Some of the things that I know happened in the women in my life's history. I had family members who were in the American Revolution. I had compatriot ancestors and thinking about that. My 91-year-old grandma, who I'll talk about throughout this, she worked in a button factory during the Great Depression in Yonkers. One of my other ancestors was really big into getting the vote for women, just kind of thinking about what were they involved in, what were the important things going on in their own life. So the first spot that I'm going to send you on, when I can find my mouse here, which is right there, there we go, is I want you to look around your house, okay? And I want you to look around, if you have family members, look around their house too. And by look around their house, I mean like get into their attic, be creepy about it. I don't know about you folks, but I have a lot of items, or at least my parents have a lot of items that have just been handed down through the years. And sometimes my mom knows who they are. Sometimes it was just something that was passed down to her by her mother. And anybody have that experience? They just have stuff in their house and they're not really quite sure how it got there. Okay. Yes. So these are all some of the different things that I have had. These are some of the exact pictures, some are not the exact pictures. I'll just tell you a little story about them. So my great grandmother, she had this 1905 Singer sewing machine. Anybody ever have one of these or see one of these in their houses? Yeah. So she used to actually, in the tenements in New York City, they would sit around the table and they would make clothing. And I actually found a picture of my family in the tenement museum, sitting around the sewing machine, making clothes, which is kind of a really cool thing. And my mom, it's not her side of the family. She doesn't really care. She's always throwing like her keys on it and, just, she doesn't care about it, but I think it's really cool. And it's like kind of a piece of history. Christmas ornaments are also a really interesting way of oftentimes a way of handing down family traditions. Us women are kind of known as the story keepers, and we're the keeper of items. I have these weird gnomes, these like snow gnomes, all over my mother's Christmas tree. And she wasn't quite sure how they got there. She just knew she had them and she had to keep them because her mother would be very upset, knowing that she had gotten rid of them. And I did some history, I looked it up, and these were very popular in the 1920s. So knowing that, I can then kind of place them with an individual. And it's cool to go back in history and think like, wow, this ornament or this piece of china or whatever was part of my family's traditions that they had year after year. And that's kind of a cool thing to think about. Oh my gosh, I'm just reading this, Marley. You have the original Elf on the Shelf?
Yes, my parents have it at their house. It's from my grandmother. Yeah, it's from like the 50s or 60s. It's just this silly little elf shelf sitter decoration. And
Yeah.
it only became recently popular. But yeah, they have one probably from about the 50s or so.
Oh my gosh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
That's like museum quality. Very cool. Also too, if you have books, old books, my grandma had kept a ton of them. She has like these first edition like Winnie the Pooh things, and like I can't sell them because I'll get in big trouble. But it's really cool too if you have old books, open them up, smell them, because who doesn't love the smell of old books, right? And look at the writings on the inside. Like it's so cute. I see my grandma who passed away. She's born 1918, and you see like her little handwriting, like when she was probably like 5 years old, writing that, and it's just so sweet to remember that this person, this was something they valued, this is something they passed on, and especially so many decades ago, we didn't have this wealth of just stuff, and the stuff that people had were of value to them. You know, I can go in my kid's playroom right now, and I would be happy to just burn the whole thing right down, because it's not. Sorry, you just heard me say that. He's like, hey! But you know, like it's there's just so much available stuff now. But the people our ancestors had, when they got something, it usually meant a lot to them. They took good care of it and they passed that down. Also, too, sometimes in old books, you can find letters, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But they would just put random things inside old books, just like you would, you know, if you're straightening up. And I found some really great letters that way, just tucked in the pages. So keep that in mind. Jewelry is a really interesting find if you have something like this. And if you, I don't know about other people, but sometimes it's like random items of jewelry you'll just come across. I'm a big fan of going to a jewelry store, and they'll do this for free, and just ask them, say like, hey, can you tell me what time period this is from? And by knowing this, I then go back in old photos and I try to see if I can spot the person wearing that piece of jewelry, to kind of give it somebody who it belongs to. So that's like a super sleuth detective move. This down here, old dolls. I have one, not this doll. This doll is so creepy. But I have a doll from my grandma that her sister, who passed away at 5 years old of appendicitis, that my grandma kept her entire life. And it was a doll, and my mother has that doll in her house now. She actually does have it tucked away in the attic because she is kind of scared of it, but it is something that was special to my grandma, that reminded her of her sister who never really got a chance to live. And that's been passed down. So old toys, old dolls, china, any flatware, stuff for the table, candlesticks, all that stuff was like really big ticket items for our ancestors. And to have something like that is important. And again, they put a lot of thought and effort into why they wanted a certain style, or at least the person giving it to them put a lot of thought into stuff. So look around, and again, like you can always even bring it to have it actually appraised, not even with the intention of selling it, but just kind of get a sense of value. What was it worth back then? How much maybe did the person spend on it? Was it expensive back then? And each of these items do tell a story. And just try to think about, you know, kind of have to use some creative imagination about why were these items passed down to you. So one of the things, probably the most, I guess, obvious places to look for information on our ancestors, especially our female ancestors, are in pictures. So I have 3 pictures here, and this is where I'm going to ask you to kind of do a little examination here. If somebody can pick one of these pictures, look at it, and tell me, maybe give me a time frame, what you notice about the ladies in the picture, anything that's going to jump out on you, time, possible place that something took place. Anybody want to go, or I'll just kind of pop on a picture to ask. Let's talk about this one here. Anybody have an idea of, I'm going to ask the easy question. Where was this picture taken?
Quick question, which one are you pointing to?
I'm sorry, I'm pointing to the center one right here.
Okay, there you go.
Coalport, PA.
Yeah, Coalport, PA. Perfect. So if I found this in a drawer, I know, okay, this is going to belong to my Pennsylvania ancestors. So anybody want to take a guess at what time period this could possibly be? And I'm going to tell you how I
Late 1800s, early 1900s.
Okay, good. It was the 1890s. Now, the way that I know that, from this picture is using some context clues. So this lady here, this is Monica Warner. This is my great-great-grandma. She's in this picture here. Now, how many children do you see? This shouldn't be a hard question. I think I said we put up 3. Yes. Okay, good. Everybody's eyesight's good. Perfect. You see 3 kids. Now, this woman had 10 children. Now, I don't know if she just picked the best 3 looking ones and asked them to be in the photo. I hope not, because these kids aren't really that attractive. So I hope she didn't take the best 3. So knowing that she has these 3 kids, I can put her in about 1895 based on when the birth between the 3rd child to the 4th child was. So that's kind of a way of doing that. How many children that are girls are in this picture?
2? 1.
Close. There's
1.
one. And somebody told me this, there's 1 girl in this photo, and a way that you could tell that with women is during this time period, women parted their hair directly down the center, and the boys would brush it forward. It was the standard practice for boys to wear these long gowns or dresses, as we would consider them today, almost until they were about 12 years old. My great, sorry, just heard an echo.
I will be asking.
Oh, sorry. I thought it sounded muted. Okay, that's okay. What was I saying? My grandpa was born in 1913 in Pennsylvania, and he remembers going with his older brother and having his brother buy him his first pair of long pants. And that was a big thing for men. Now, another thing too, that you may or may not know, that as whatever we feel like when somebody says, oh, I'm having a baby girl, I'm having a baby boy, what colors are associated with those genders?
Right, pink and blue.
Pink and blue, right? Who's got the blue?
Boys.
Boys. Reverse those colors, because it was actually the Sears and Roebuck calendar, look at me, catalog that flipped those colors on people. And they made Sears and Roebuck, the catalog. They were actually the ones who popularized that blue is for boys and pink is for girls. So if you, most likely you're going to see something in black and white, but if you happen to find some type of item, maybe in your own house, if you find it's pink, don't assume that it's automatically for a girl. It could very likely be for a boy. So just keep that in mind. Where was this picture taken? Was it taken in somebody's house? Was it taken on a field? Was it in a farm?
Studio?
It was taken on a studio. Yes. Perfect. Yeah. You can just kind of tell from the backdrop. What do you think the socioeconomic status of these people are?
Middle class? I don't think they'd be that poor because they're dressed okay.
Right.
Dressed like they could afford clothing.
Yeah, they're dressed like they can afford clothing. If you take a look at this kid's boots, you know, they don't look like they're the best well-made ones, but they are farmers. They're Pennsylvania farmers. So that's kind of like, you got to get a little bit of a picture of her. And this lady, she just looks like she means business as far as I know.
Are they twins? The ones dressed alike, the 2 boys?
No, they're not. I think
They're
there's,
not?
yeah, I think there's a 2-year age difference between them actually.
Well, because they're dressed alike, usually you put twins in the same clothing, right?
Well, I have my kids and they're 2 years apart and I put them in the same clothing all the time. So,
Oh, okay.
so I don't know, but I also had sisters who were twins growing up. So maybe I'm not the best person to ask for that. So, oh, sorry. I don't know why that just popped to the wrong one. How about over here, this lady in front, this lady in this coat. This is and you can say whatever you want about her. She's 91 years old. She's my grandma, still alive. What can you tell about grandma from this picture? What kind of a lady is she?
Very well off.
What's
Fur
that?
coat. Very well off, the fur coat.
Yes, yes. She's one of those people that like, she really wasn't that well off at the time, but she wanted people to think that she was. So she would always put on her fur coat. If you just happen to find this in a box of photos, what time period do you think this was in?
1940s. 50s? I think
It's-
maybe 50s.
It's 1950. Nice job. You got right in between.
No, only because my mom was born in 24 and she didn't have this kind of coat. She just had like a little fur on the collar.
Yeah.
The style of the hair and the coat look similar.
Yep. Yeah. Makeup and haircuts are a huge, just ask anybody who was, graduated in the 1980s, you look at their yearbook, like you can tell that certain time periods based by hair and makeup. And my grandma, even you can kind of just tell from this photo, my grandma was somebody who really always cared about her looks. We don't tell her, but we always joke that she forever looked like Elizabeth Taylor, but now she kind of looks like Robert De Niro. So, not the best aging. What are you doing? Can't do that down here. Stop it. Okay, sorry. So yeah, she's somebody who cares about her looks. She's somebody who takes the time. Also, too, somebody pointed this out as a really cool clue of where you can kind of place them in history is look for power lines. If there's power lines in the background and what type they are, they will also kind of give you a clue. And she is at the back of a church. You can tell the building behind her. So, and it's winter time. So she's obviously, if you didn't know where this was, she's not in Arizona. Again, kind of placing her in a thing. Now, this photo over here, I'm going to just preface this by saying this photo is a trick. It was not originally given to me as a trick, but it turned out it was a trick. Can anybody tell me anything about this picture based on what you're looking at? Where maybe was it taking place? When was it taken? All that kind of stuff.
It's one of the sister ships to the Titanic.
Yeah, like you would think so, right? That's what I thought. Anybody else want to take a guess on where this was taken?
Studio.
Yeah, could be. Studio.
Coney Island.
Who said Coney Island?
Yes.
Who did?
That's a
Yeah.
surprise.
Yes, this was taken at Coney Island. Okay. Now, backstory on this photo. Okay. So my husband has this mystery great grandfather. Okay, who's supposed to be this gentleman right here. This is my husband's grandmother. Okay. So I was given this photo by my husband's aunt who told me, this is the family and this is this mystery. So I'm thinking that this family came over from Germany. I'm researching all these ships and I am not finding anything that would, give it from Germany. And I'm just totally brick walled. So then I do some research and it turns out that Coney Island had a postcard thing where you would go and you would take pictures in front of this sign and you would send it off. That was a very common thing that people would do these postcard pictures and send it like, look at the great time I'm having at Coney Island. So I was really annoyed when I found that. But what really, really annoyed me that my husband's aunt did was she confused the name of this guy's mother and told me that the mother's name was Tanya. So for years, I'm looking for the stupid Tanya on this boat. And it turns out that my husband's aunt misremembered this woman's dog growing up. And I was looking for a collie the entire time. So I really just wasted a whole bunch of time looking for collies and I'm in Coney Island. So, don't get too crazy with it. But just remember too that our ancestors like to have fun, just like we do now. And pictures aren't always what they seem. Now, some things to look in a picture when you're looking at is some things with the people. Obviously, the people who are, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I don't know if it was muted for a second. The people who are in there. And by people, I also mean the number of people, like I mentioned earlier with the woman with the kids, that's going to be a sign. The clothing, if there's any street signs in the background, the forefront, any types of bridges, churches, anything that's going to be some type of landmark, McDonald's, whatever. Just look around and try to see if you can kind of place where they are in a time, place, and history. Check out the cars. I'm not quite sure of the name of the website, but there are several websites where you can upload pictures of cars in the background and they'll tell you what kind of car that is. And why that's important is knowing the year. kind of getting an estimate for that. Because if anything, it's going to tell you this photo was not taken before this time because this car wasn't around. Excuse me, the type of photos, those tin types, I'm not going to try to pronounce that other name. Polaroids, postcard paper.
Daguerreotype.
Say it again.
Daguerreotype.
That just rolled right off your tongue. Like you just say it all day. I like that. Gadora type. Is that how you say it?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to like point to you every time I want to say that. Okay. You're going to shout it out for me. Okay. You want to check out, are they smiling? Their expressions, because these older photos, smiling in photos was not something that people just did. Based on the light exposure, people had to have like this stern face. So based on their expression, you can kind of tell what time period. And I'm laughing because today was the spring picture day for my son, and I know he messed it up that he wasn't smiling. So, you know, I don't even know what the pictures are going to look like, but I know they're not good. But just knowing, you know, people's expression can also put them in a time period. The items that are there, look for when you're going your scavenger hunt. Can you find any of these items in any of these pictures to place them with them? Any words, something even like names of ships, obviously the photographer's name, if that's there. There's there's a few websites that you can also upload a picture and it'll search. I don't know how this does this, and you can tell as I'm explaining this that I'm not really a computer person, but it searches the name of the photographer in their database, and then they will send it back to you that this photographer had this signature here, and this is where he practiced, this is the years he was in business. So that's kind of a cool little tool. And always flip your papers over, you know, look at them and see if there's any not hidden, but, you know, faded messages on there. So another place that women also spend a large portion of their day, not me, because my husband's probably about to come down in a second and ask me what is going on for dinner, is the kitchen. And women often would write down their recipes, and these recipes would be passed down from generation to generation. And if you think about, you know, even ourselves in the modern culture, we spend so much time around the table, you know, talking, sharing stories. And you spent a lot more time 100 years ago doing that, because you were really preparing dinner. Like you were killing chickens, you were defeathering things. Like it was not as simple as just opening up your fridge and, you know, defrosting something and throwing it at your kids. So they really put a lot of pride in this. Recipes also reflect your families, where they're coming from. The ingredients have to be native to that area. You know, they didn't have a Whole Foods where they could just go and they can get, you know, I'm living in Italy and I can go get stuff from, you know, China to make for dinner. These recipes, these are things that are native to that region. You also might see cross outs with people when they start putting the different ingredients for if they come over to America, what's available there, because they might not have the same stuff. So that's kind of interesting. Keep an eye out for if there's any writings in the margins, because that's kind of, you know, you never know if people are making substitutes. Also too, with these recipes in times of war, World War I and World War II, where there were rationings involved, people also may have had to make adjustments. You know, you might see a cross out for butter and somebody's putting margarine in there. And just that might give you a sense of what that daily life was like for these people. Now, a little caveat behind this, just because they're old recipes does not mean they taste good. My aunt gave me my grandmother's book of old recipes. So I had just purchased my first house, and I thought, what a great way to celebrate, have my family over, and I'm gonna make, not the one that's still alive, the one who, my grandma who passed when I was 7 years old, which I'm gonna talk a little about more in the next section here. She passed when I was 7 years old. So I made all this stuff that my grandma had made, and everybody sat down, and you just see that look of disgust on their face. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like I totally messed up everything. Like, I'm so sorry. I'm so embarrassed. I spent all this time. And my dad's like, I don't know why you just spent all that time doing that. Your grandma was a horrendous cook. Like these recipes should have died with her. So just because they're old doesn't mean they're good. Taste them first. Another interesting thing with women that women often do is keep letters and diaries. They would more so, especially than a lot of times than men. And what I really like about letters and diaries is you kind of get a sense of the relationship between people. If you look at a census record, you look at a birth record, they say, these are their parents, this is their spouse, whatever. Great. But if you get a hold of some of these old letters, diaries, you really get to see the interaction behind them. And this, in the background here, this is a letter that my grandma, Roberta, she graduated from Skidmore College in the 1930s with a master's in chemistry. And that's big for, a woman, especially during the time. And I found this letter that she had written to her parents. And it's a really cute letter. And it talks about how my grandma found a stray dog with her dorm mates, and they kept the stray dog. And then like a local police officer found them, the dog barking. Then she asks how her father's feeling. She thanks them. She compares him to John Rockefeller. She thanks them for sending something for as an anti-diarrhea medicine, which I'm sure my grandmother was a very proud person, and she probably would not be happy that I was sharing that she had that, these meetings, but whatever. She talks about the grades that she got in her French class. She's excited about the things, but one thing that I noticed here, and she writes, and it kind of, if you didn't know the relationship, you would think it's kind of like a tongue-in-cheek response, but she writes here, "Well, I must close now. Please reply as promptly as I did. Couldn't you take or borrow a car and come over to see me someday?" From that line, can you gather anything about her relationship with her parents?
She doesn't feel important to them.
Yeah, she didn't. Her mother actually put her in a boarding house when that was when whose sister had passed away when she was 5 years old. Her mother had dumped her in a boarding house, shoveled her back and forth to family members. And her parents didn't even come to her wedding. So, kind of by asking that, you kind of see that disconnect there. If you would just, maybe if you were coming and you're reading these things and you come from a good family, you're coming from this background, you might think oh, this is so silly. But she really, from what my mom and my aunts have told me, is she had a very strained relationship with her parents. And it's kind of evident in this record. Another copies that I have of records, which are really great if you find something like this, are letters written from people who are away at war to their spouses, their moms, whatever. Now, in this letter, my grandma, her name is Roberta, her parents are Harold and Catherine. Harold and Catherine had a one-night stand, and Catherine got pregnant. Harold went off to World War I. And I have a whole bunch of letters from Harold to Catherine saying hey, think that baby might have been born now. Hope all's well. And then another, he's like, we're doing pretty good in France here. Can you send me some word? What's going on? And then there's some more just saying hey, haven't heard from you in a few months. Looking forward to meeting the baby. He doesn't even know, it doesn't even look like he knows the baby's name. But again, in exchange, you can tell that there's this disconnect there. And that's going to tell you a lot more about somebody's relationship than just reading on a piece of paper, husband and wife. So if you can find that gives you a lot of information. Now, one of the best places to find information on your family members, if you have this is like the gold mine of family records, is a family Bible. And oftentimes women were the ones who kept this. This is a family Bible, is where people would write down the dates of when people were born, when they died, where they were buried, if they were in any holy orders. And it's just a treasure trove of information, because in most cases, the events are being written down in real time by the people who were there. So just in family Bibles, sometimes they don't even look like Bibles. They could just, if you saw this book right here, you wouldn't really think anything of it. There's actually nothing on it that says Bible. So if you come across some old books, just start opening them up. See if, the word of the Lord is in there, whatever, and then start looking for pages that might have a family tree involved in there. But it's a great record source. Jumping over to some type of actual record collections, let's take a look at marriage records. Marriage records are the best records that you're going to find on your female ancestors. In most cases, they're going to tell you, hopefully, maybe when she was born, who her parents were, what her maiden name was, what her married name was, a lot of great stuff. So on this record here that I'm showing you, okay, is for Robert McColgan and Mary McLaughlin. Okay, and this record is from 1850. It's in Boston. Now, looking at this record, can anybody tell me what Mary's parents' names are? It's right.
Patrick,
What's that?
Patrick and Mary,
Yeah, Pat, what's the last name?
Doherty,
Doherty. Okay. Now come over here. What is her name here?
Laughlin.
McLaughlin. Why is her name Mary McLaughlin when her parents are Patrick and Mary Doherty?
Well, this maiden name is listed. No?
Nope.
It's her second marriage.
It's her
Says
second marriage. Yep. It says it right over here. So it's
Oh,
her
yeah.
second marriage. Now, a lot of times women, it's actually very good that they put this down, but if you were a woman and you had a different name from your parents, very likely you were a widow. Divorce was very uncommon, so likely you were a widow, but you would still continue to go by your husband's name. Mary McLaughlin, the story goes that she was married, which I do have records for. She was married to this guy, Robert McLaughlin. She was holding her son. Robert was going out hunting. He waved and he accidentally shot himself in the face. His gun fired off. And
oh gosh.
yeah, so she was then sent over to America, and I guess her family, one of the guys in the town or whatever, Robert McColgan, was a indentured servant. He was working for a family there, and she had a arranged marriage. Also, too, you can kind of notice if you see these ages that are over like 25, over 25 is kind of considered like an old maid. You want to wonder too, is this person's second marriage? So that's kind of a big clue for things. So she is a domestic. Later on, she will find that she was a laundress. She would actually, she had, I guess, like a modern dry cleaning business for whatever the time period was. And she's from Ireland, and we'll come back to her. But that's a little bit about a marriage record. And just knowing this information, I can go back in Ireland. If I can find out what town she's actually from, I can try to look for her in the records with Patrick and Mary Doherty. I can look to see if she had a second marriage, to look for all these things as a jumping off point. Now, beginning in the 1800s, which is actually pretty good if you think about it, it was common for people to announce their marriage in the newspaper, usually in the engagement section, and then again when they got married. This is a marriage announcement for my grandma, the one from Skidmore College, who was trying to write to her parents. And reading this marriage announcement and this engagement announcement, what are some things you can learn about my grandma? And what are some things maybe that you can kind of go searching for other records based on it? And I'll read it to you in case you're having a hard time reading it print. So it just says Roberta Paul is married to Herman Baker. Miss Roberta K. Paul, daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Harold Paul of Pittsfield and White Plains, New York, was married Saturday at Mount Carmel Church in White Plains to Herman Joseph Baker, son of Mr. and Mrs. A. Baker of Patton, Pennsylvania. Reverend Joseph Rosa officiated. Miss Norma E. Reynolds of Richmond, cousin of the bride, attended Mrs. Baker, and Paul Baker was his brother's best man. The bride is a graduate of Skidmore College and is employed at the laboratory technician by St. Agnes Hospital in White Plains. Her husband is a landscaper there. And over there you have a picture of that. So what are some things you know about my grandma based on this marriage announcement?
Lots of family names, where she went to school, all sorts of good stuff.
Yeah, all sorts of good stuff. I like that. Yeah, all sorts of good stuff. It tells you also too, a lot of these times where these people met. And she was St. Agnes Hospital. That's where I was born. Many years later, she met him. She was working as a lab technician. He was a groundskeeper. One thing that did play into their marriage a lot was my grandmother was a lot more educated than my grandfather. And that kind of was a big dynamic with their relationship, just knowing that. And you get a little glimpse of that in something like this. But again, you're getting those family names, you're getting where they come from. You can kind of jump off from that point. And I'm telling you this not so you can see about my family, but so obviously you can take those skills and hopefully use them for your own. Other places you will find women in print. This was that woman from earlier who had the 3 kids, who had the very severe part down the middle. This is her in her later years, who looks like she's kind of mellowed out a bit, not looking too intense. But newspapers was where people would write about daily happenings. And things that you wouldn't really think that are important now that would make the newspaper were extremely common back then. Anywhere from, Mrs. Warner went to go visit her sister down the road and she made a cherry pie. Things like that would get in the newspapers. This is just some stories about her being over 80. She never saw a doctor. One is how she makes rugs. Again, you're kind of getting a sense of how these people are, what's important to them, what was their daily life like. Also, too, this is a side note, one of the hardest records to come by are divorce records, but it usually was mandated that people had to publish that they were getting a divorce in the newspaper. So that is something to look for. One of my ancestors had an affair with the guy who created Lowe's movie theater. And I guess the husband found out and read this whole spread about what a little trollop she was for dating the guy with Lowe's movie theaters. And I always think about that every time I go to the movies, that I should probably be a lot richer than I am, thanks to Anne Honey. And of course, obituaries. They're a great source of finding information about your ancestors. Now, a little bit of a pro tip is use Mrs. when you're looking for them. So my name is Sarah Gutmann, right? You wouldn't often find me as Sarah Gutmann in these newspapers. You would find me as Mrs. James Gutmann, Mrs. Jim Gutmann, Mrs. Jimmy Gutmann. You could find me as Mrs. Gutmann. So keep that in mind. Use their husband's name, use Mrs. first name last name first. You can find these articles for newspapers on newspapers.com. You can check out for New York newspapers, fultonhistory.com. That's free. And Family Search, which is always free, and it's the sister site of Ancestry, has just signed a deal with Genealogy Bank, and they're running a whole bunch of newspapers right now that you can access. And also, too, check out your local library, especially the library of the area where your family's from, and just ask the librarians there and say, hey, do you have access to the local newspapers that I can look for? And librarians are great. And I'm not just saying that because I'm doing a talk with them. Like, they're cool. And they have a lot of great sources. Going back to knowing your family's history and talking about Google Books. If you go on Google Books, they have a plethora of millions and millions of books from all over the world of town and church histories. And a lot of these towns would publish these, I don't want to call them anthologies or yearbooks, every year or every 10 years. And what they would do is they would spotlight their members' profiles. I'm sorry, not members' profiles, a little bio about their members. And this is this lady here that it's from Pennsylvania. And again, you might not think that your family was important enough to get in a book, but this is how people would just learn about their neighbors. If you go into Google Books, search the town that you're looking for. And then once you start getting all the titles with the towns, you can click on an individual book and they have like the magnifying glass, put the person's name in there and see if it pops up. And you should get a result within a few seconds. So it's a really good way. And if something is published prior to 1921, you can see it for free because there's a 100-year privacy on there. So that's really good. And these things by historical societies, these churches are usually that 100-year mark that you're looking for. So you got to find some really great stuff about that there. Yearbook collections, as Marlene had mentioned before, your Ancestry account is currently free if you use the libraries. Ancestry, one of their big things that they did 2 years ago was collect yearbooks from all over America, starting in 1905. And you might be surprised you can find yourself in some of these yearbook collections. Now, yearbooks are a fun thing because it's a yearbook, and you're seeing your ancestors in a time that you probably weren't used to seeing them in. A lot of times I feel like we think of our ancestors as these older individuals, but you get to see them when they're 18 years old, when they're 22, whatever, when they're graduating, and they're just this, life is just ahead of them, to get to learn about them. This here is my mom. And I put this out here because my mom doesn't come to my talks, so I can show her pictures, and who cares? So this is my mother, and it says Monica Ann Baker. Can anybody tell me some stuff about my mom just based on the descriptions that are in there? And this is a very common thing that people would do. They would put little descriptions about themselves in their yearbook. I'm sure you probably have as well. And you can kind of tell a little bit about a person. So reading this description, what are some things you know about my mom?
She likes dogs and she's small because they call Munchkin and Petite. Does she like Twinkies, or is that a different?
She did, but now she has celiac, so too bad.
Did they know then that she had celiac?
What's that?
Did they know then?
No, she just found out like 5 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, so she loved Twinkies. She still loves dogs. Anybody want to guess what PP and P stand for? I'd be shocked. What's that?
I can't. I don't know.
Those are the different names of her dogs. They all start with the letter P. She didn't have a bladder infection. But PP and P, like that was, important to her. David, that was her boyfriend she had for 10 years. My dad has no connection with David, but whatever. She did plays at Stefanak High School. She, you could just tell little bits about her. And I'm not 5 feet tall yet. And you could tell that from that description of my mom, that I kind of follow her path that way. So that's a fun thing to do, just to go into these Ancestry yearbooks. You can go into ancestry.com, go into search, go into the catalog, and then type yearbooks. And you can specifically just look for your family members in there and have some fun with that. Now, another thing you could do is looking at Lineage Societies. This was a lot of the big things for our ancestors. I'm a member of the DAR, the Daughters of the American Revolution myself. And a lot of times with these lineage societies is they would trace people's lineage back. And you can go to some of these websites, especially the DAR, and you can type your ancestors' names in there and see if they have somebody who already went through that person and has a family tree connecting them to a patriot. So it's kind of like an easy, like step-by-step. And you know that this is legitimate because people from these organizations have spent a lot of time verifying these links. And they'll oftentimes provide you with these links. I do another presentation about going into the specific databases. But I recommend if you have family who you think is from the Revolutionary War time period, to definitely go and check out the free dar.org website. You could search for ancestor if you know a specific person who was in the American Revolution, or descendant, and you can put in their names and see if anybody has traced that person to a Revolutionary War patriot. So that's a cool way. Also, too, we're not just limited to our society in America. The Sons of Italy, and I know I'm saying the Sons of Italy, they also have some types of lineage societies. And women, when their husbands would die, would get a pension, and the husbands had traced their family tree that way. So that's another way of looking, at these different connections with women and their family tree, because they might have already filled it out themselves. Does anybody have any questions as I'm talking? And I'm sorry if I haven't asked that before. Everybody's being so good and quiet, so I just want to make sure everyone's still with me here. Now, a very, very super duper important thing to remember is that in many cultures, women kept their maiden name. It was not even something people thought about. when they get married to change their name. So you have to be familiar with that culture, with those traditions. I know in Italy, they did not change their name when they got married. In France, they did not change their name when they got married. And sometimes they would go by it in social settings, but in many times they were still known by their father's name. And that's extremely important when you're looking at passenger lists when people are coming over to our country. So, because you might be finding a group of individuals and you're thinking, wow, like that was super brave of that father to take those 5 children over to America. Like, you know, my husband makes a big deal that he just took them to Stop and Shop for an hour, you know, like going to America and crossing the ocean without mom, big thing. But mom might be there. She just might be under a different name that you're not seeing her with. And I'll show you an example of that in a second. So because women sometimes either go by their married name or their maiden name, it's very important to know the men in their lives. You want to know who if you can, their father, their brothers, sons, uncles, anything that's going to kind of tag a woman with a man, because unfortunately, a lot of times we are dependent upon finding those men in the records and then getting the women that way. So some of the things that you're going to want to consider, some record collections that you have here: birth, baptismal. Oftentimes baptismal records are great, especially with birth records are not available yet, that people haven't started filling it out in towns. Marriages, death records, passenger list. Women would not usually naturalize themselves to become American citizens. They would rely on their husbands for that. However, their husbands would have to usually have to document who their wife was, where and when they were married, and where and when she was born, and sometimes who her parents were on these naturalization records. So that's a good thing to consider. Draft cards for men would name kind of like the emergency contact information, these draft cards for men. And oftentimes they would name their wife or they would name their mother in them. So that's a good way of connecting individuals to either their children or their spouses. Pension records. One of the best ways, if you have family who you believe was in the Civil War, is to check out the widow's pension, the Civil War's widow's pension. So when one of these veterans from the Civil War passed away, the government would give money to their widow. And it's all documented on there, and will also give a description of how that soldier served in the war. Last will and testament for men and women. Men would leave usually belongings or property to women with under the care of another male. And in some cases, based on the time period, women would be able to write their own last will and testament. You should check that out. That's usually available in like a local courthouse. They do have some online on Ancestry, but a lot of times you're going to have to dive into these local levels and contact local historical societies, local courthouses, and see what they have there. Land records. Land records, again, you're usually dealing with men, but some of these land records, which are the oldest form of records we have in this country, will be a gift, maybe from a father-in-law as a dowry. I'm giving you this land for the marriage to my daughter. Name of daughter, here we are. Here is a piece of land to celebrate the birth of your baby girl. You can look at these land records and they usually tell you why a person is being presented this land, whether for purchase or gift, and the relationships with other people around there. Estate records kind of go back to that last will and testament. And again, town and church publications from Google Docs. So now I'm going to hop over here for a second and check out a passenger list. Now, this passenger list is from one of my family members. And if you take a look at this list, it looks as though these kids are kind of coming over. If you see Palladino, if you've seen Forgetti, Carmine Forgetti, Raphael Forgetti, they're 15, 10, and 6. And it looks like that they're traveling to America by themselves. But if you didn't know any better, you wouldn't realize that their mom is right here, right above their name. And you would maybe think that, okay, this is a couple coming over together, but it's actually a brother and sister coming to America and she's bringing her children. Now, the story goes that Carmela on here came to America to be reunited with her husband. And she was shocked to come to America and find out that her husband had already taken another American wife when he had just gotten her pregnant a few months prior, or I guess 10 months prior. So that didn't go over well for anybody, I don't believe. But you could have just glazed over this passenger list. And again, if you, especially if you're not clicking on that button to view the entire image, the entire record, you could just be going right over that and not realize it. So always look at the record, always give thoughts to names above, below, next pages of things, how they might tie into your ancestry.
Can you tell us again, sorry, who's brother and sister?
So right
It's
here.
just hard for me to read, so.
Oh yeah, sure. So Carmine Palladino and Carmela Palladino were actually brother and sister on here. And I know that from other records. I know that from birth records. I know that from death records. So you have to look at all these records in context of things to kind of piece these stories together.
So it's brother and sister, her 3 children, not husband and wife and their 3 children.
Right. And these kids are not the same last name as these 2 individuals. So.
Okay. Oh, because their last name is this, the one that starts with R?
Yep. Progetto.
Okay.
Yep. And then that was Palladino. Now, census records are a great way to learn about anybody in your family. And I've mentioned before in my talks that just because you see somebody's name is spelled a certain way on a census record, don't get too crazy about it, because it's only as accurate as the person providing the information and the person writing the information down, as well as the person in 2021 who's trying to read this information and put it into a computer. So don't get too hung up about this information. But anyway, this is Mary McColgan. If you recall her, she was the lady who we saw the marriage record to earlier, the one whose husband accidentally killed himself, and she got married to Robert McColgan. And if you read this line right here, it says she's his wife, gives the age, and it says M2. M2, what do you think M2 might stand for when her husband was M1 in the married single column?
Her second marriage.
Your second marriage, great. Tells you how many years they've been married. And then I think this is like the saddest question that they ask in the 1910, 1900 census. They ask, how many kids did you have and how many kids are still alive? She had 6 kids, 4 of them were still alive. So now I can go back and I can look for birth records and death records if they were made and available at the time period. And one of her daughters had just died. Her oldest daughter had just died the month before of typhoid. So again, they're from Ireland, England. They give the year of citizenship. She became a citizen along with her husband, so I could go and I can look for this information. She's a laundress. And I'm trying to say, I'm looking at a different screen. That's why my head is kind of cocked a different way. So that's the information you can kind of get on her. Now, some things to remind her with the census records prior to 1850, really only the white men were named in census records. So you're going to kind of hit a bit of a roadblock. You can get past it with women in the 1850 census records. Before that, they were just tick marks. For example, if you were to, my family was to be in the 1840 census when they're not naming women, my household would appear as the household of James Gutmann. And in this household, I have 2 children between the ages of 1 and 10. There is a woman here by the ages of 30 to 39, and there's a man here by the ages of 40 to 49. That's all you're going to know about my family based on those earlier census records. That actually is a lie, because I meant to write 1880. In 1880, they start providing relationships with people, so you can kind of start seeing like, okay, this is the woman, this is the husband and wife, this is a brother and sister who are living together. So that's also very important too when you're looking at census records. Don't just assume that people who are similar in age who are adults living with each other are married, they could be brother and sister. So an important thing to know too is familiarize yourself a little bit with the law, because based on the law, that's going to tell you what's available for women. So some of the things that I've seen in New York that I thought are kind of interesting to share. I'm sorry, not interesting in New York, but all over America. In 1664 in Maryland, Maryland declared that any Englishwoman who married a slave would then have to live as a slave of her husband's master. This is a way of getting women to not obviously marry slaves and then have the slaves turn around and say, I should be free. So they said, okay, you want to marry a slave, now you're a slave, congratulations. So that's going to really hinder people from doing that. In 1718 in Pennsylvania, married women were allowed to manage and own their own property in their own name during the incapacity of their spouse. So that was a big thing. In Mississippi in 1839, the first of the Married Women's Property Act grants married women the right to own but not control property in her own name. So you can own it in your own name, but your husband or brother or father still needs to be able to say what you're, have say of what you're doing with your land. In 1850, Illinois, when Illinois opened its first hospital for the mentally ill in 1851, the state legislature passed a law that within 2 years of its passage was amended to require a public hearing before a person could be committed against his or her will. There's one exception, however. A husband could have his wife committed without either a public hearing or consent. So ladies, if you're acting a little crazy, your husband could very well bring you to a mental hospital, drop you off, and then just never see you again, and there's no questions asked. I'm working right now with a client, and I founded his family. This is in 1919. This woman, her husband, the week after her husband died, her husband had left her pension. She was placed in an insane asylum by her son-in-law, who was granted the executor of the will. And he then deemed himself that he would be in charge of her pension. And she remained in a mental asylum until she died 8 years later. And I'm trying to go through these records right now to see if she did, in fact, have a type of mental illness, or did her son-in-law just want money and he just locked up his mother-in-law in a mental institution to literally to die. But it's crazy, like the stuff that they were able to do. So anyway, in 1860, New York has their Married Women's Property Act, granting married women the right to control their own earnings. And in 1862, that Property Act is amended so that women now lose equal guardianship of their children. They don't have a say in their kids, but they do have a veto power if they don't like where the kid's getting an apprentice or who their guardian's going to be. So again, knowing these laws, you're not going to bother looking for land laws if women were not allowed to own property. That's kind of what I'm trying to get at here. You're not going to find a woman having a last will and testament because she wasn't able to have belongings based on certain time periods. So now that I've talked about my family, some of the places where you can go find your family is familysearch.com, always totally free. It's a great source. Newspapers.com. Contact the local town clerk. I'm a big fan of just contacting people on a local level because they have a lot of great record collections. You're going to get them faster. You're going to get it cheaper than if you were to go on a bigger service like a Vital Check to order your vital records. Ancestry, of course, and Google Books. So those are all places you can find some of these records here. Now, if you have DNA and you're looking specifically at DNA and helping you out there, you want to trace your maternal line. If you think about it, sometimes it's called the umbilical line, that belly button thing that attaches you to your mother's. Everybody has mitochondrial DNA. Now, my sons have my mitochondrial DNA, my mother's. They, though, will not pass that DNA on to their children. That line will stop there with them. If I had a daughter, my daughter would have passed on that line. So right now, the only true test that's, it's actually the only company that's truly testing that mitochondrial DNA and only mitochondrial DNA is familytreedna.com. Now, have people heard of Family Tree DNA by any chance? Has anybody heard of them? Family Tree DNA?
Yeah.
Okay, great. I'm actually very surprised. Have people heard of Ancestry DNA?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. I'm guessing a lot of people have heard a lot more about Ancestry DNA and probably 23andMe, which is great. They've done a great job marketing. The problem with Family Tree DNA is not a lot of people have heard about them. So a lot of people have not tested with them. So your results are not going to be as good. As a professional genealogist, we get people who say, I have my mitochondrial DNA tested. Can you please help me? Or I've had my Y DNA tested. Can you help me? And we do our best that we can, but we're not getting that great comparison that you would be getting at a bigger company like Ancestry, looking for those results. But it's zoning in on this particular line. So that's a way, if you are focusing on the maternal line, may as well, give a try at the familytreedna.com. So that's all what time is it? Oh, great. That's pretty much all I have on my end. Anybody have any questions, comments, or anything? I'm going to unscreen share so that I can see people in the chat, because I can never do that while I'm doing these talks. So I apologize if you were writing in chat anything. I cannot see it. Oh, wow. Oh my God. A whole bunch in chat. I'm sorry.
I'd like to know, is there a format you use to put all this information in? Because I have a flow chart that is growing, too big for the paper.
You mean my family tree stuff?
Yeah. Where do you put it? Is there a certain format?
I mean, I use Ancestry. I've been using Ancestry since it was originally floppy disks, and it was the Family Tree Maker software.
I did use that. It comes out so tiny when you print it.
Oh, you just got to fix the printing things.
Oh, okay. So
Yeah,
Family Tree Maker is good one?
Yeah, that's my favorite one. There's also Roots Magic, but I don't really like, I have to use that one for work, but I don't really like that one very much, but don't tell, them.
Roots what?
Roots Magic.
Roots Magic. Okay.
But I like Family Tree
Maker.
Family Tree Maker, yeah.
I have that one, yes.
I'm looking in here. So what am I now? Teresa, was that book, The Porcelain Doll, any good? I was just looking here. She wasn't. I am sorry that I was not responding back to that. I was not seeing any of that, so I apologize. Oh, in the early 1920s, was it common for widowed men to place their young children in orphanages? Yes. That unfortunately, we had really big families back then, and people just weren't able to take care of them. And they do have collections on Ancestry. If you go into search, you go into catalog, search for orphanages, but also for foundlings. A really great book is The Orphan Train. And also, well, it's not really that, but Before You Were Yours, that's a really interesting read. About how they had stolen, this is a true story, they had stolen kids from the Deep South and they had sent them off. And they were adopted usually by these wealthy families. Really great stories about that. Any other questions or anything? And
I
also,
would like, my name is Cheryl. I'd like to say something. I've done Ancestry. I've used Ancestry for quite a few years now, and I did the Ancestry DNA, and I knew that my father had been married or had remarried after he divorced my mother. I suspected, and found another whole family of sisters. And I've connected with them, and I talk to them, I talk to two of them, talk to a brother and sister about once a week.
that's awesome. Did you
Yeah, it's great.
recently do that, or has it been going on for a while?
I'm sorry.
When did you do that? When did you with them?
I made the initial contact about 2 years ago, a little over 2 years ago.
Oh, that's great. What a nice story.
Yeah, it worked out.
Yeah, that's awesome. And we're looking, is there another way to trace the names of an orphanage that a family member was in? Again, just checking out, you can research personal If you just Google the orphanage's name, if you happen to know that. I know New York State has recently opened up a lot of the closed adoption records. And I'm not quite sure the policy of that because it's kind of brand new and I don't deal too much with adoption. But they do have a wealth of information on ancestry with foundling and orphanage records if you just kind of poke your head in there.
Oh,
Also, too, if you're looking for people separated, they also have Facebook groups for, they're called Adoption Angels, and it's people who help you find birth families.
Oh, I don't need to find that. This is me. I just wrote it. My father's and his 4 siblings were put into an orphanage.
Okay.
Different orphanages, I think, some for girls and some for boys.
Mhm.
And we thought, my sister and I thought we knew the name of the orphanage. We just wanted to find out how long he was there or
Yeah.
what the story was. I just can't seem to. I did write one orphanage, they responded right away and looked in the records, but it was the wrong one. So
Ah,
and then there's another way to, I guess I'll have to do the ancestry thing and then go to catalog. And then
Yeah.
orphanages and family. Okay, I'll try that. Thank you.
might as well. Absolutely. And I'm going to send this over to the library, and then if people have registered tonight, hopefully that can get passed along to you so you can see some of the
Oh, great. Thank you.
comments. Sure, of course. Anybody else? Everybody's very well behaved, and thank you so much.
Sarah,
Yeah.
do you use GEDmatch?
I do, but not that often, because I find that if you're going to look at for GEDmatch, people like because it's free, and people will take their ancestry results and they'll upload it onto there. You can also upload your ancestry results for free on myheritage.com and also find my past. But GEDmatch isn't, ancestry is usually what we use when we're looking for unknown parentage. I don't know if that just helped you out at all or no.
Yeah, no, I mainly use Ancestry. I use 23andMe, but I prefer Ancestry, but a lot of my relatives are in Italy and they don't have Ancestry over there.
Yep, that's an American-based one.
So in GEDmatch, wherever you do it, you can upload your DNA to that, and then you can compare your DNA to people who had their DNA tested on different formats.
You brought a good point. Ancestry is an American-based company. The company you would most likely get the most hits of overseas family is MyHeritage. And you can upload your results for free. And it's either you can see your matches or your ethnicity for free, and it's $30. So you don't have to buy all these other kits. You're just uploading them. One of the big things that people have really kind of shied away from with GEDmatch is because the police do have access to that.
You have to give them permission.
Yeah. But there was that whole thing where they were just kind of open for a while.
Yeah.
And there was also a data leak with 23andMe, and that kind of really hurt them too, where they ended up losing a quarter of their employees they had to lay off.
Yeah.
So that was a big thing. But I mean, I'm the worst person to ask because I'll be like, yeah, give my DNA, put them out. I don't care. They actually have this really cool thing that is started. It's out now. I'm not sure how much it is, but it's a lot because it's very controversial that you can take an old postage stamp and you can send it away and they will analyze the DNA of that postage stamp and then connect you to see how many generations or whatever you are. So if you have some great-great-grandfather, you can use that to help you. Problem is, now you might have just been the kind of that privacy law there, like say you have a letter from somebody who you think is like a sex offender, now you just submitted that, you just gave them their DNA, and it's this whole big genealogy database loophole that's going on right now. It's very interesting. So we'll see what happens with it.
They can do the DNA from licking the stamp. They can. Yep. Oh my goodness.
So you hope that they didn't have their dog do it, because I think it's a really cool idea.
Wow.
And I hate that people do things for evil, and I'm like, oh man, can't you just be regular? So yeah. Any other questions, comments, or anything like that? Or
suggestion for folks that has been really helpful for finding my female relatives, and that is So when you're doing the search in Ancestry, and I look for death records, but what I do is I put in the parent information and I leave the child part either empty or I like the the potential dead person, I leave blank and I put in the parent information. And I have found so many women in my family as a result of having done that. Or I might just put their first name and their parent information, and then I find their married name, and then I go from there. So that's, I've had,
Great tip. Thank
yeah.
you. I always love like I showed you like little tips like that, even the lady who said like with the parting of the hair. I'm like, that's so great. Thank you. All right, so I think we're just about out of time. So again, thank you very much to the library for setting this up for hosting. I think we have some other programs coming up. I don't remember. I don't have a calendar in front of me right now.
I think we have one in, I think we talked about August, and I think we talked about the fall also. We're getting there.
All right, whatever. I'm here.
We definitely have some things coming up. Yeah, we'll definitely.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thanks for everybody hanging out with me tonight. And I'll hopefully see you guys in a month or so. So
Thank you, Sarah. It was very good.
thank you. Have a great night, everybody.
Thank
Is
you.
that a picture of
Bye.
your family tree in the background?
Yes, always. That's from my canvas. It's $30, so you can go on there and upload it for free.
Well, my family tree doesn't like have that much information on it, so it wouldn't be.
Oh, okay. Well, keep working.
Yeah.
All right, everybody.
Just a bunch of farmers in Pennsylvania.
That's mine. All right, everybody. Have a great night. Take care.
Good night, everybody. Thank you.